Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Fire These Times. I'm your host, Ela Yokes, and today we'll be talking with Eiad Husham, who will introduce himself in a bit, about a piece that he wrote and was published on the New Internationalist on the 27th of February of this year, 2025, entitled Revolutionary Aid in Sudan. So I wanted to talk to him because I'm very curious about why certain contexts, certain countries and others create resistance movements that are more or less organized democratically. Of course, there's variations in that, and we'll try and get into those in this episode itself. More keen on adopting stuff like mutual aid, for example, to support one another, hence the title of the episode, Revolutionary Aid, and have be more willing at the very least to have this broader critique and approach towards the state. And Sudan is a fascinating case beyond just even that, because similarly to Syria, and I will try and do a bit of that comparison, although at this stage it will be, I think, more or less superficial, because I do want to do more in-depth research on the matter, and between parentheses, again, as of now, I haven't yet managed to get funding for that, but maybe at some point. But let's say for the purpose of this conversation, at the very least, it is fascinating that, Sudan has had this dictatorship by Omar al-Bashir for decades, and obviously Syria as well by, Hafez al-Assad as well as Bashar al-Assad up until December of last year. How did they, in both contexts, how did Syrians and Sudanese, despite overwhelming challenges, manage to create something that, can objectively be described as democratic, at the very least aspiring to be democratic, even if in, again, many parts of Syria, and this is certainly true of Sudan as well, there are problems, and the challenges, and no one is perfect, and there are disagreements and tensions within, and internal dissent. All of these things happen. But why Syria and why Sudan? Or why Myanmar, for example, which is another point of comparison, where you had this coup by the military junta very, very soon after this massive outbreak of resistance against the junta, to the point that now, a few years down the line, the resistance is sort of winning, and the junta is actually on the back end. Which doesn't stop it from being extremely deadly and dangerous, of course. But there is something there, and I think there is something to be analyzed and understood if our goal is, to repeat a bit the tagline of the Fire These Times, which, we did not invent it, I did not invent it, but, building the shell, building the new in the shell of the old. What does that even mean, right? Because these are contexts that are mired with difficulties, with trauma, with pain, with suffering, with violence, with mass deaths. Certainly when it comes to Sudan, certainly when it comes to Syria, and certainly when it comes to Myanmar. Myanmar, I will quickly say, for those who want, we did a recent episode on our sister podcast, From the Periphery, with two activists there who were talking about the aftermath of the earthquake that happened a few weeks ago, and how the junta has responded to the earthquake by basically bombing the resistance areas, and how the resistance areas and the community, the groups there operating there, have also responded to that situation, and how they're operating again under this mutual aid principle. And of course, Syria is a ongoing obsession of mine, as long-time listeners would know. But Sudan is, for me, relatively new. I mean, I've followed Sudan in and out, on and off for a few years now, but I certainly haven't done it justice. And think of this episode as slowly trying to rectify that. Our friend and colleague and co-host Ayman Makarim has done an episode on Sudan for the Fire These Times in the past, and recently as well another episode on Sudan with the same two guests on the From the Periphery podcast, so you can check those out if you want. But in terms of my personal contribution, please think of this specific episode as the beginning of many to come, because I think Sudan is grossly understudied and underexplored, and it offers fascinating lessons for us all. As usual, to support this podcast, as well as all of the other podcasts and projects that are created and produced under the From the Periphery Media Collective, you can just head out to patreon.com/fromtheperiphery, and for as little as $5 a month, you basically get access to everything we do before everyone else, as well as exclusive content of various podcasts directly to your podcast using the RSS feed that you get on Patreon directly. It explains all of that there if you don't know what that is. And of course, the monthly hangout that we do with our Patreon, which is a get-together every month where we chat about various things that we talk on the podcast, as well as things in the news and whatnot. And our upcoming movie club, which is the second one that we do, which the first one was on Palestine that Ayman Makarim, and the second one on Lebanon that Ayman will also be running, but I will be assisting that as well. Okay, that was a long enough introduction. Apologies for that. As always, folks, thank you for listening and take care.
Yeah, I'm Eiad Husham. I'm a Sudanese journalist. I work for different media outlets like New Humanitarian, New Internationalist, and other media outlets. I cover Sudan and conflict and humanitarian crisis for almost 5 years, but it became like more intense during this conflict and yeah, it just I'm trying with my work to echo the voices of the people who are suffering because of the ongoing conflict in my country, and you know, Sudan is going through the worst humanitarian and displacement crisis in the world. Um, we're talking about millions are in need for urgent humanitarian aid. We're talking about millions are internally or had to flee to neighbor countries. I think my work at this time is not just doing what I love. It's more of trying uh, to help my people to be heard in the world and the suffering they're enduring because of this conflict and because of as we are going to speak maybe later about how regional and international actors are fueling this conflict and burning our country and just for their interest, and they're using um local proxies to get the job done. So yeah, this is a little small brief of me about me, but yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thanks a lot for that, Ayad, as well, and for everything you do. We will be primarily focusing at least on a piece that you wrote for the New Internationalist. That's how I first heard of you. And well, we were put in touch actually by two friends, colleagues, comrades, Sarah Al-Hassan and Dalia Abdelmonem, who were on our sister podcast from the periphery just a few days ago, actually, or yeah, no, actually about 10 days ago, to talk about Khartoum especially, but also about Sudan more broadly, with what's been happening. So people can go to that episode if they want to listen as well to that. Um, I guess a way to start, as good as any, I suppose, is talk to us a bit about the piece and maybe also tell us like why did you choose to write it in the first place? Revolutionary Aid in Sudan, published on the New Internationalist on the end of February 2025. And of course, I will link this in the show notes.
Yeah, I think the idea of behind this was, I have to give the credit to Amy Hall, the editor of the New Internationalist. I think we both agreed that this is something should be um, told to the people, told to the world that Sudanese people had no one to rely on except themselves, except the grassroots initiatives that was based on the resistance committees and the neighborhoods committee, which led the Sudanese revolution back in 2018 and 2019. And when the war started and most of the international NGOs left for security concerns and withdraw their employees and suspend some of the local employees. Sudanese people, I think they realized, and those brave young women and men understood that no one will be there to help them except if they be in charge, if they try to do their best to support their people. I think not some, a lot of them had the privilege to leave, but they chose not to. They chose to stay with their people. They chose to try to do their best, to help as much as possible. And I think, as was said in this piece, this is the only lifeline is still helping the Sudanese on the ground. I think, yeah, the experience is not perfect. Yes, there's mistakes. Yes, there's things we need to address. There's um, some issues, but they are not really NGOs. They're not aid workers. They're just grassroots initiatives consist of the youth, women, and men who participated in the revolution, who wanted to put the country on the path to democracy, a real democracy, and went through a lot for this country. The revolution, taking out the dictator Omar Bashir, and then the pandemic, and then now the war. I think they have sacrificed a lot, and that's why we thought this should be, we should shed a light on such um, initiatives and how they're doing their best to help in this difficult time in Sudan's history. So the idea came from that place.
Hmm. I've been fascinated by the resistance committees for a while and just the wider movement around it as well, of course, in multiple parts of the country. Your piece for the New Internationalist reminded me that I've always wanted to do something more specific on Sudan on this podcast. We've only done one episode in the past, and certainly I don't feel like this does it justice due to well, what you've just mentioned. That there is something, despite the challenges that I can barely really imagine in my head right now, we've seen extraordinary expressions of as you mentioned, grassroots organizing, basically democracy in action in many places, these committees that were part of the revolution, and so on and so forth. Um, I guess let's just get into them like more directly. What are these resistance committees, movements? How did they start, and how would you describe their uniqueness in a way?
I think, after the Arabic Spring in 2011, Sudanese people were, influenced by the movement that took place in Tunisia and in Egypt,
Mm-hmm.
and were some protests during that time in Sudan. Even that after in 2012 and 2013. So in 2013, um, some neighbor some neighbors were start to creating those grassroots initiatives because they think it's a better way to coordinate their revolutionary efforts. And this was based on idea that was brought by the Sudanese Communist Party in 2012. They called it neighborhoods committees, and started from there. But the Sudanese people, they have a long history of revolutions and demonstrations, so they upgraded the idea into what we know today as resistance committees. So it started in 2012 as an idea, implemented in 2013, and I can tell you in 2013, uh, the regime was shaken. The protesters managed to control the capital for 3 days. That's why Omar Bashir called what we know today as the RSF, which previously known as Janjaweed, and they committed war crimes, killing hundreds of Sudanese protesters in 2013 just to end the demonstrations. And but it didn't stop there. Sudanese people kept trying to, remove Omar Bashir and his dictatorship. In 2018, in January, Sudanese people took the streets again. Uh, Lastly, there were crackdowns on the demonstrations, but 11 months later, the idea of the resistance committees reached the peak of development and peak of coordination. So at that moment, we saw them taking the streets. We saw them having a unique way of communicating, a unique way of, you know, planning their demonstrations, coordinating with each other, even having just to protect the demonstrations from the crackdowns. So I think yes, yes, it was a political party idea, but later it was developed by the Sudanese people and was upgraded for years until we saw this version. And I think this is the main reason behind that the revolution managed to at least succeed in throwing Omar al-Bashir. Um, and I think even the type of the structure they made, where there's no president, where there's no someone in charge, it's the group who are in charge. I think this structure made them more flexible, more able to work together, to gather more youth who believe that maybe the regular political parties are not for them because of, there's a system of a certain structure and being getting orders and other stuff that maybe this generation is not um, interested in. So it gives them another example of how to put their efforts into something that they all feel that they are represented in. So I think this is the main strength of resistance committees.
And is it fair to say, I mean, you quote Dalia saying basically something along those lines that they have effectively they've stepped in where the state had to withdraw because of the resistance against it, and they've essentially managed to create an alternative to the state in those areas. Not to mention, as I mean, you just mentioned here, the fact that they are de facto leaderless makes them also more difficult to suppress because there isn't this one leader that the dictatorship or the military or the RSF, I mean, or whatever can arrest, right?
Yeah, this helped them from the security crackdowns.
Hmm.
Even if you detain like 10 members of the resistance committee of one of them, it's not going to stop their work. They will still be able to plan, they will still be able to take on the streets and yes, as Dalia said, they were strong and they're still strong. And I think the moment we can explain how strong they were after the coup in 2021, Hamdok, the prime minister, Abdullah Hamdok, the civilian prime minister, went back and signed a partnership alone with Al-Burhan. And in like 10 minutes from the protesters requesting his release, it flipped to, we don't want him. He's gonna go get us another partnership with the people, with the forces that they're killing us. So immediately, this agreement was what they call it, thrown out of the window. So this example explain how powerful they were, and they're powerful because they are like rooted in the grasses of their neighbors. They control this area. You can't, as a government, force something in their areas without their acceptance because they are in charge. So they were a state, and a state with participation of all of the people. When we create something that everyone, for the first time in Sudan, believes they are involved because they can be in the meeting, because they can say their opinion, and their opinion will be considered for the first time in Sudan's history. So it's more of the people's committees. It's describe all of the ideology, all of the opinions in every neighborhood. So this is what gave them a real power.
Right. What this kind of brought to mind is I've said myself, but I've also, of course, heard many people say that one of the best things that you can do if you're building either a resistance movement or an alternative to an authoritarian regime or whatever is get to know your neighbors. because once that basic social bond is broken, that makes it much easier for a regime, especially an authoritarian one, to divide people, to lock them up, to whatnot. It becomes easier to crack down, kind of the classical divide and conquer in many ways. And what I'm hearing from you, and please feel free to even give us examples of the different areas that you very eloquently explore in the piece, which again, as I said, I'll include in the show notes anyway. What I'm hearing from you is that like a large parts of Sudan already had that, in the sense that this was like an active effort of people living in different neighborhoods, different areas, different parts of the country, to get to know one another, to organize with one another, to kind of maybe put aside differences or whatever, but really have this like one goal in common. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, it's definitely fair. I think one of the unique elements of the Sudanese revolution that it didn't start from the capital this time. In the history of Sudan, always the revolution will start from the capital, because if you manage to control the capital, then the regime uh, is done. But this time, the revolution started from states that the regime didn't even consider that something like that could happen in. And I think, yeah, the resistance committees, the grassroots initiatives are uh, are existing in every single state of Sudan, which makes them very strong. And they have like a basic agreement. They agree on some political conditions, on exactly how they want their country to be. They have a similar uh, basic agreement on, for example, they want democracy, they want to end corruption, they want a system that allows all of the Sudanese to participate in every single decision that the country makes. They want Sudan to have um, a good foreign relationship with countries based on the interest of our people. So I think it's always fair to say that even though they have differences in some elements, but they will still manage uh, to see the bigger picture, to be united behind one goal, that putting a country on the road to democracy.
Right. Thank you a lot for that. Yeah. It reminds me also a bit on the example of Syria, which is the one that I'm much more familiar with, in the sense that not only the local councils and the local coordination committees, which I've explored a few times on this show, on this podcast, which I'm hoping to do more of in the future as well, but also just the fact that the revolution in 2011 did not even start in Damascus, it was in Daraa. And for the most part, most of the kind of the history or the story of the past 14 or so years have been outside of Damascus, have been in the north of the country, in the south of the country, in the east of the country, and so on and so forth. The good and the bad parts, all of the highs and lows, as they would say, have been mostly there. So that's an interesting comparison that I just thought of now while you were talking. Okay, let me ask you if it's okay about like you did mention the fact that they are leaderless for the most part, or they are. So how do they organize? Or at least what can you tell us in terms of like how is the communication actually done? How are decisions made? That sort of thing.
Because of their flexible structure, and as I said, they have no leaders, leaderless, as you mentioned. They created coordinating bodies that works with the same structure. That there is no leaders. It's just representative members of each resistance committee in every neighborhood, in every city, and then every city will be represented in a coordinating body with the other cities or with the other states. So this helped them to create a structure that will definitely help them to coordinate, but at the same time, it will help them to discuss ideas, to agree on things and disagree on other stuff. And I think one of uh, the important thing that this structure helped them to learn is how to solve the disagreement in a democratic way. for the first time, we have a, a political committees or groups that prefer to solve their differences through conversation without using weapons, without using, any kind of violence. So this was the example they're trying to show for the politicians and for the security forces that as a nation, we should always try to find middle grounds in our differences without relying on violence. And I think those coordinating bodies help them to have a clear vision of what exactly their agreements and what exactly are their disagreements. And it helped them to coordinate the demonstrations, the the goals they want to achieve, uh, what should be pressured more and what should be, left aside for a while, and how they should have a one voice when they deal with the government, when they deal with the authority. So, for example, they had agreements on a lot of stuff. Democracy is a must. The military should go back uh, to their military bases and not be involved in politics. They want a free election. They wanted a democratic transitional period with justice. They want justice to be served in the areas, even the resistance committees in Khartoum, they were asking for justice for Darfur. Okay, they wanted justice for every single soul that was, lost in the through the revolution and through the years following the revolution. So I think they had goals that they all agreed on, and these coordinating bodies helped them to have conversations, to discuss tactics. So they always had a one voice when it comes to the major issues.
That I find that fascinating. What I'm hearing is that essentially I don't know, I guess we can call it like a consensus-based model where disagreements are recognized as natural and I mean, maybe I'm simplifying a bit, and I'm sure as you do mention this as well. Like there are lots of problems in different places, but this is the principle at the very least that like there is a way of finding compromises that do not, at the very least, compromise on the fundamentals, which is calling for transitional justice and a government and democratic rule and liberty and all of those kind of fundamentals. As long as those are not broken as promises, as they're not violated, there are ways to move forward despite other types of disagreements. Would that be a fair summary at the very least?
Yeah, yeah, sure. They had clear ideas of their goals and they
Hmm.
were all, behind it. Maybe they will have difference about the tactic, about
Right,
should we block the road or should we protest. They will have difference about the tactic, but they will not have difference about the topics, I think.
right, right. That's very important. At least there's like fundamental principles that is agreed upon.
Yeah.
I guess, yeah, the next question it's related to all of this, but folks listening to this, and I think most people in general, they are familiar with like it became a bit of a meme online, like the Lady Liberty of the Sudanese Revolution. I'm referring to Ala Salah, that photo and that video in 2019, and but for the most part, and there are exceptions to this, but for the most part, I think uh, this photo was also used to overlook the fact that many women have been part of the Sudanese revolution. In fact, have taken like leadership at the very least important roles. Can you talk a bit about that if you don't mind?
Yeah, definitely Sudanese women have, been maybe the most important part of this revolution and, the resistance committees and the grassroots initiatives. I think the Sudanese women were like they had so much space through these grassroots groups. I think they felt they're represented, so they wanted to be a part of it. They had their own demands about things that they were like during the Bashir regime they were suffering from, and even in the demonstration, it will start with, as a it's a celebrating sound that Sudanese women always like start the demonstration with at 1 o'clock. So yeah, definitely the Sudanese women were a big part of every step since the revolution till today. And I want to say that through this podcast, we should thank many of the young Sudanese women who were so brave, to stay in Khartoum, to stay in affected areas, even though they had the privilege to leave, but they decided to stay to help people. They are providing food, helping with medical stuff, fighting for humanitarian aid, protecting those who are in need. So the Sudanese women for sure played a very valuable part of the revolution and even after the revolution till today. And I think this shows you the the strength of the Sudanese women and their ability and their potential of, they were always sided in politics, even in political parties. They were not represented in the way they deserve. And I think they found structures that was, opening doors for them. They earned the doors,
Mm,
not only open for them, but they earned it. And they were treated equally, and they found a way to even demand their needs and their goals,
mm,
and was supported by most of the revolutionary groups, like freedom of women, the freedom of how they dress, how they um changing some laws, Sharia laws that was affecting their lives in Sudan because of
mm,
Omar al-Bashir regime, and for them even to be taking the streets and protesting and changing the what they call it, the view that Omar Bashir and his regime was trying to implement in the Sudanese head, that women should not be in the street protesting or should not be participating in any political environment, and they should stay away from that. And if she did that, she's not a good person. I think this revolution, they earned their present, and they changed a lot in the mentality of the Sudanese people who have been affected and influenced by the Muslim Brotherhood regime.
right. And I mean, I should say also that you do interview quite a few women, and you platform them on the in that article of yours. Um, what comes to mind now is thinking, okay, we've given an overview, and you've done really like I'm very grateful for this conversation already, because these are like in-depth um, contextualization I think very few people have. Um, so let's say we've explored a bit of the timeline of like how we got here, and more or less like gone into the details of why the committees were able to operate the way they did, where they come from, and so on. Given the nature of the conflict, the crisis today in Sudan, the role of foreign actors, which let's get into this now as well, of course, especially the UAE and others. Um, how are these committees and other movements faring? Like in the sense of how are they adapting? What are certain things that they've had to do now, for example, that they didn't have to do a few years ago, that sort of thing. And where do you think, like, I'm not asking you to predict necessarily, but how do you envision they might adapt in the future if the situation doesn't improve?
I think as I said, they went through a lot, so they had a lot of experience with, being flexible and
Right.
try to adapt with the situation. For example, in 2018 and 2019, the target was to remove Omar al-Bashir and establish a civilian led government in Sudan, and to lead the country towards democracy. But then after, the signing of the civilian and partnership with the military council, one of the first decisions that was announced by the government, they wanted to depoliticize resistance committees and change them into something called change and services committees. So they wanted them only to take care of, the bread, the local markets, the corruption in the neighbors. They wanted them
Mm.
to be sided from their political agenda. But at that time, the resistance committees were very smart. They didn't give up on their people. They believed, yeah, they should have, duties and helping their people. But at the
Mm.
same time, they didn't want to be sided from their political agenda. So they created a parallel structure that was called Change and Services Committees, and they kept the resistance committees. So they were able to be flexible about the situation and not let the government win a point saying, oh, now they are not really focused on you guys, they are focused on their political agenda. So they created a parallel structure.
Right.
And then in the COVID, in the pandemic, they had to create another parallel structure, which was, volunteering and helping hospitals and providing assistance to those affected by the pandemic. So they created the emergency response rooms. So it was not created during this war, it was created during the pandemic. So they were always ready to be flexible and to adjust and to adapt to the situation. And this what makes them a unique experience and a unique structure that I think they will always be able to adapt. Now, during the war, definitely the sounds of the weapons are higher than the protesting sounds. So some of them decided, yes, they have problems with the RSF and they have problems with SAF. But let's get RSF out of the equation, the Janjaweed, and then we can figure something out with SAF. So some of them, yes, joined SAF to fight along SAF, okay, against the RSF to protect their people because they think, the RSF is committing, not they think, it's actually happening. The RSF is committing a textbook of war crimes and crimes against humanity and sexual violence and all the things that are inhuman. So some of them, yeah, decided that. And the other part, or the most part of them, they decided to still put their political statements and try to explain how they see this conflict and that both sides are not considering the best interest of the Sudanese people. But at the same time, they are working in public kitchens, they are working in emergency response room just to adjust with the needs of their people. Now the Sudanese people, the most priority thing to them now is not the freedom. It's to be able to, eat and get medication. So they are not really side, but they are focused on how to help their people, especially with international NGOs not being in the picture, with the lack of funding, with all these issues. They had to adjust to the situation. And I think they will always be able, because their structure is flexible. As we said, they are leaderless, they are more flexible, more rooted in the society. So I think they will always have the chance to adjust to the situation. And
I
yeah,
mean,
about the
mm, please go for it.
international,
Yeah.
yeah, about the international intervene in Sudan. I think it's fair to say the world changed. Previously, the countries with their interest in a specific country, they will send the military to get the job done. But now they will look for local proxies who can get this job done. And I think it's not only UAE, it's Egypt, it's Russia, it's Iran, everyone who's really invested in the resources of Sudan, they're taking side on in this conflict and they're supporting a side. So I'm not gonna be okay with, Egypt supporting SAF, Russia supporting SAF, Iran supporting SAF. and I would just be blaming UAE and RSF. No, we should have always like a straight line that we don't want no one to intervene in our country, whether it's with SAF, whether it's with the RSF. And I think all of these countries, they're not helping us out of their goodwill. They have interest in Sudan. We all know Sudan is the land of resources. There's no country, I can't remember any country that have this much of different resources. So all of them, they want something. So it's for us, the Sudanese people, to decide that no, we want to be in charge of our resources. We should be able to decide with who we're gonna do trading, with who we're gonna sign a contract, and how it's gonna benefit us. So I think the this will not stop because they will stop. They will not stop. It should stop because as a Sudanese, we should be more forward about our opinions that this should not be the case. We don't want no one to support this war. We don't want those regional and international actors to keep on fueling the war and benefiting the armed trade companies and benefiting their interests in Sudan. And now we see it. Now we are closer to the Libyan scenario, almost like divided. Now the RSF is about to, you know, take control of Al-Fashir, which means the whole Darfur region, which equals the size of France, will be under the control of the RSF. We have the SPLM, Abdelaziz Al-Helu, they have their controlled areas. So we have Abdel Wahid, he has his own, and we have SAF in different areas. So when we look at the map now, Sudan is divided into four small countries. So I think this should be our position, and I think even the resistance committees are clear about it. They refuse any uh, foreign intervene in Sudan.
Right. I mean, I can't not mention that just yesterday, today is the 16th of April, so yesterday it was announced that a UK conference on Sudan failed, and the articles that usually cover it do a pretty bad job, I would say, at explaining why it failed, given that one of the participants was the UAE, which is a huge part of the problem here. As you said, it's of course not the only problem or anything like that, but it is certainly a big one. Um, I guess so. We're coming up to slowly wrapping up, and I want to make sure that first I ask you, like, is there anything that you think we should have gotten into, but we didn't?
No, I think we are having a good conversation. Actually, I'm enjoying it,
Okay, and
and
so
I hope I'm good at delivering my thoughts.
you are. Honestly, thank you for your time, Iyad. I guess so. One thing I'll ask you before we probably wrap up is you mentioned solidarity networks, connecting different initiatives in the country in Sudan with international support, and as well, and that includes, of course, Sudanese people in exile organizing different. Whether it's aid drives, whether it's whatever other things that they can help, whether in neighboring countries as refugees or in the West or whatever as diasporas. Um, Talk to us a bit about that. You did already, so maybe we can get into it slightly more detailed. But also the reason why I want to bring that up is I want to ask you, listeners of this podcast right now, if they want to help, if they want to do something to educate themselves, what are certain resources that you can recommend? And I mean, if you cannot think of all of them now, that's fine. You can send them to me and I'll add them to the show notes anyway later.
Yeah, I think um, with all of the ERR had a problem with the international NGOs when it comes to fund because they want them to be an NGO. They want to turn them into an NGO, which is not the case. They're not NGOs. They're grassroots initiatives. So they will not play by the rules you want them to play with, and you want them to have a certain structure where there's a president and where there's accounting team, and they should give proposals and create documents, and those kind of things doesn't happen on the ground when there's a conflict on the ground, when there is people dying, when there is intense clashes between the two sides of this war. So this was the main issue at the beginning. And even at that moment, it helped the Sudanese people to adjust to it. So the ERR, I can say now, for most of their work, they rely on Sudanese, as you said, living abroad. They are funding the ERR, they're giving a lot to the ERR because they understand the situation on the ground and they understand the need to donate. Still, yeah, some NGOs now, international NGOs now are more flexible, with funding them. But yeah, USAID was, suspended and their fund was
Yeah.
suspended. So 80% of the publications were affected by this
Mm-hmm.
suspension. But still, the Sudanese will always continue to support those grassroots initiatives because they trust them. They built
Mm-hmm.
a trust with them. They see their money invested in the right way. Even the Sudanese people, we had a lot of NGOs. I'm not saying they're not good. They are all amazing. They did great job. But never the Sudanese people felt that there is a funding coming in and it's affecting their life the same way they are feeling now.
Right.
Because every morning they will go to the public kitchen to take their meal. So these fundings are being really put and spent on the Sudanese people. That's why even the people who are donating now they trust the process. They trust the grassroots initiatives to do the job more than they trust the government, more than they will trust any other NGO. They believe that we know them, they're from our neighbor, we know their families, so they're familiar with the people who are members of these groups, so they can trust them.
Mm.
And everything that happened since that moment, that the ERR showed really that they deserve this trust. And also, you mentioned you had Sarah with you on this podcast.
Mm-hmm.
Sarah is one of the best people who helped a lot in this conflict. I think she wouldn't like me to say all of this, but she truly helped in, fundraising, helping a lot of families. I think she's doing a great job, and Sarah is also trusted by the people. They know every dollar they send to Sarah will be used in the right place and will reach the people who are in need. So I think the Sudanese people managed to create another structure of fundraising, uh, how to fundraise, how to use the money, and how to prove the money, how it was used in the best way. So
Mm.
I think this has also helped, to at least reduce the disaster of this war. Even if we say today, and there's 23 million are in need for urgent humanitarian help,
Yeah.
believe me, if the ERR were not really helping and Sudanese were not donating and some other, foreigners are really showing solidarity with the Sudanese and donating, without their donations, the numbers were gonna be very, very, very high, more than this.
Right.
So I think the Sudanese people managed to create a very nice structure of funding their grassroots initiatives.
Mm. Okay, well, Iyad, on that note, I want to first thank you a lot for coming on the Fire these times and taking the time with us. Where can people read your work? I believe you've mentioned the New Internationalist, you've mentioned Ain, the New Humanitarian. I googled and I think there's a website called Jiska, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, yes, that.
Any
Yeah.
anything else? I'll include all of those in the show notes.
I'll send you my X account. Also, they can
Perfect. Okay.
follow me.
hmm
Yeah.
Okay. Lovely. Well, Iyad, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Thank you for having me and giving me the chance. And I hope I managed to explain some of the ideas that I
You
had.
absolutely did. I'm very
Thank you
grateful
so
for your
much.
time. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.